Well. Here we are. Finally here, the September update with the Ranger class reveal. As usual, this is going to be a quick overview, concise format for those of you that don't have time for the 3-hour stream that they showed. So if you like the video, leave a comment, leave a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. And with that being said, now the YouTube comment highlight was about what solo player experience will be available in the game. So you can check out the question here.
So this one was from our lovely friend Mindful K9, which said, I love MMORPGs for their size and world building. The social aspect is cool, but I prefer random adventures coming together because we all need to work together to get through this event or area we are all happening to stumble across. But I don't really like groups or guilds outside of that. So what will be any benefits for those who want a little more solo gameplay as well? So they're kind of asking, will there be options for people who want to solo as well as, they'll do the game event stuff, but
Sure. It's a good question. The MMO landscape is, of course, filled with players who want to engage, excuse me, with finding new friends. At the same time, a lot of people come into MMOs with a group of friends that are already existing. And so you want to be able to provide avenues to both socially connect other players by creating challenges that require group efforts in order to overcome. And that's always going to be a part of the MMO landscape, whether you're a solo player or not. MMOs, by definition, are massively multiplayer. So that means it's not a solo game. We're not creating a solo game, but it doesn't mean that we don't offer gameplay that is solo-centric as well. It lives in addition to the social aspect of what MMOs provide. And so part of what we do in order to give that element of gameplay is we have quest lines that are devoted towards solo players. We have hunting grounds. Obviously, one of the benefits of being a solo player is you get to keep everything that drops, right? You don't have to share loot with a party or with friends. That's one benefit of being a solo player. But it's going to be more difficult to overcome challenges. And those individuals who are up to taking that additional level of difficulty are going to excel perhaps in their character progression a bit faster than those who are more group-centric. It's going to be a little bit of a roll of the dice there because there are loot tables, there are reward tables that accompany that. But it's important to note that from a content perspective, Ashes of Creation is looking to fulfill both that solo-oriented mind in gameplay as well as the group and social experience. And a lot of times those paths diverge. They move apart and they come back together. And that kind of process is going to be seen throughout the leveling in Ashes of Creation, where you'll have more opportunities for solo gameplay and some opportunities for group gameplay. And for those solo players who don't really care about finding a community to play with, but they want to have one when they need it, there's going to be a lot of opportunities from a dialogue perspective, in-game chat options. You can join as part of citizenships. There's a lot of pseudo-factions there, social organizations that give you an in to other players without the strong bonds that typically come with guild-oriented organizations, right? And I think that's a comfortable medium between the two.
Now, on one hand, I sympathize because I don't always want to be social at all times, but I still want to play the game that I love. On the other hand, it's a multiplayer game, so you need to play with multiple people sometimes. It would be kind of odd if there was a lot of single-player focus to the game, but let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Now, they showed off the newest Cosmetic Set, the Order of the Giant Slayers, which is pretty sick. I love the 4-winged eagle thing. The mount looks like a mix between a rhino and a triceratops, and that armor is badass. The helmet reminds me of the helmet that Russell Crowe wore in the movie Gladiator, which I'm sure there are plenty of you watching that weren't even born when that movie came out. And it has lots of spikes, probably to dissuade giants from eating you. Now, the dev discussion was about gathering and PvP. Artisan crafters will be prime targets for combatant players, so with that being said, what tools or activities would gatherers like to see to help protect their hard-earned materials while adventuring in Vera? Now see, this one's hard, because if you make it too safe, then you're interrupting one of the core principles of Ashes of Creations, which is meaningful player versus player combat. I think there's a lot of things you could do to kind of mitigate this issue. You can make it so that gatherers drop less if they fight back. You could give a blessing or some sort of buff so that, once a day you get to keep what you've gathered when you die. You could make it so that when you hit a certain level or get a certain piece of gear for a class that you've mastered, you get to keep more of your stuff, kind of like a perk of being dedicated to the class. So there's things you can do. I think as long as you don't make it impossible for a player to go outside of a town without getting ganked, I think it's going to be okay. With that being said, if I'm forced to have an armed contingent of guards with me every time I need to go get some freaking wood from a tree, it gets tedious at that point. So let me know what your guys' thoughts are below. Now for the moment we've all been waiting for. The basic ranged attack reveal. Hold up. They aren't revealing the whole class. As usual, here's the disclaimer that this is not the final build. Everything here is subject to change. They're continuing to work on animations, yada 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 yada. So right off the bat, I love the environment that they're in. The ruins of the tower, the breeze flowing through the trees, the sunrise. It's prettier than real life, at least where I live. Now they did give off some spoilers of sorts. See, the enemies that are here are a Minotaur scouting party. They've moved into the area to check something out that they didn't tell us. These Minotaurs have been working with some other not friendly forces to get organized and learn how to be better fighters, so they plan to exact revenge on the player races who've been keeping them down for so long. Now the Minotaurs themselves look really good, the attention to detail, as with everything, is wonderful. Then Steven showed off a tower in the distance that's apparently the Tower of Carfine. I think I'm saying that right. The tower was a place for mages to study in the old Aelan Empire, and during the fall they did some questionable things and a lot of bad stuff happened. Things went south. So that is one of the quest lines that we're going to see in Alpha 2 one day when it releases finally. And then finally we get to see some combat. So first he uses the longbow. You can either tap to attack quickly or hold and charge the attack, and then later he changes to the short bow, which is more focused on acrobatics and mobility, so it doesn't slow you as much when you're attacking as the longbow does, and it has a higher rate of fire, but it does less damage. You also can't charge your basic attack on the short bow. Now we got to see 3 different abilities, which better than nothing. So first off, you get the quick shot. It gives a quick shot to the target and gives them a debuff that stacks. So your quick shot has 3 charges, and each use gives a stack of that debuff that increases the damage of the next quick shot. So it can be quite the hard-hitting ability if you just spam it real quick. Now the next ability on the 1 key is Snipe. So you see Steven kneels down and charges it up before releasing a hard-hitting single attack, and the longer it gets charged, the stronger the attack. And then the 3 key is Airstrike, which is one of the sickest abilities I think I've ever seen. You leap through the air, do a flip, and bombard the ground underneath you. I'm just going to let that play a couple more times. For an MMO, that's a pretty sick looking ability. Now, they also showed off action mode versus tab targeting mode. In action mode, you can still cycle through targets and hard target, but you have the option to soft target aim, where you see that little red arrow above their head that shows what your character is targeting at that time. So you don't have to aim exactly at your target, but rather look mostly at the target you want to land your ability. Now, if you noticed, Steven did not kite the mobs very well, so we can gather that he needs to get good, as it looks like a skill issue. Now, he had a cheat code that kept him alive. Hopefully, you guys that pick Ranger don't struggle that much on random mobs in the woods. However, this does speak a bit to fights actually having some difficulty, and hopefully means that questing and exploring won't be a total snooze fest. Now, Steven did have 2 follow-up questions to this reveal, and I'm going to propose the same ones to you now. What did you like about what you saw, and what would you improve? So leave your comments down below. This was just a quick overview of the preview. I plan on doing a deeper dive video into it where we'll go through the entire scene. I just don't have time in this video right now. So after that, they did an impromptu Q&A just to clear up some confusion about the range gameplay. and I will play those now.
Kind of a clear understanding of how the auto attack works versus like the abilities, and how you see those things intertwining, how you see people using the auto attacks versus the abilities. Obviously the ones here didn't have cooldowns, as Trad said, but in the future they will.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's important to note that auto attacks in previous MMOs that many of us have played kind of serve as a filler between rotations. And as your rotations go on cooldown, you go to your filler auto attacks. That's not the intent in Ashes of Creation. Ashes of Creation has separate and bespoke weapon skill trees that you develop over time when you gain experience in using these particular weapon types, these weapon groups. And those skill trees provide a lot of versatility, both horizontal and vertical power progressions. The weapon skill trees are intended to provide a lot of synergy between your rotational abilities and the weapon type that you've chosen. And as you progress, you're going to be able to influence things like number of attacks, speed of those attacks, procs that occur on those attacks, status conditions that can be applied to the target based on these basic attacks. And then when you see those things proc and happen on the target, that's when you use certain rotational abilities in your class kit to complement those proc effects, right? So you're watching out, you might get a telegraph through animation. Maybe your character does an odd type of release on the weapon animation attack, and that tells you, ooh, I'm proccing on this attack. Let me now go use this ability that has a 30% upswing on power or damage because they're under a certain status effect that's granted by my weapon ability.
Rangers be required to carry arrows, and I saw a lot of other people asking about will we have arrows, or will crafters have to craft arrows, things of that sort. Just
so we are not tracking ammunition in the game. I'm not sure how much that brings to gameplay. No, I'm sorry. In MMO gameplay, it just doesn't make sense. It's not that interesting. We are, however, with that being said, we are thinking about unique buffs that can be applied to your weapons that are on a per instance basis of the attack. So, for example, you might have a quiver that you can activate on a cooldown. And that quiver might apply some type of rider effect on the basic weapon attack that you have equipped. Or you might have some type of alchemical consumable that applies it to your melee weapon. Those, I think, are interesting because they add an element of horizontal gameplay depending on the adversary you're facing or the challenge you're up against.
They asked if a ranger doesn't have a bow equipped, can they still use their airstrike? Like, would they still be able to use certain abilities even if they didn't have their bow equipped?
Some abilities will require that certain pieces of equipment are equipped. That's true for melee abilities like a shield bash requiring a shield to be equipped, or certain ranged abilities requiring a ranged weapon to be equipped as well. It's important to note that as part of the Ashes of Creation paper doll, you have a melee main hand and offhand slot, and then you have a ranged slot as well. So you don't have to switch between weapons per se. If you execute an ability that requires a ranged weapon, but you have your melee weapon out, it will automatically swap to the ranged weapon, use the ability, and then back to your melee weapon for your basic attack should you choose. And then you can select which weapon you want to have available, your melee or your ranged for the basic attack, and you can swap between those two even in combat. But they're still equipped.
How is a melee supposed to catch up to a ranger running away from them if they're full speed? So like if a ranger is supposed to be super mobile, what are the melee's options in order to catch them?
It depends on the melee user, right? Obviously, different class kits will provide different gap closers. They'll provide different mobility skills. They'll have lockdowns. They'll have chains to pull back. They'll have a lot of different things in the rotation, right? That's part of what an MMORPG experience is. You're not just restricted to 3 or 6 skills. You have a rotational suite. And depending on the type of challenges you face is going to help determine which of those rotations you spec into from your skill tree. If you're having problems against rangers because they're constantly getting away, then it's probably a good idea for you to spec into abilities that lock the target down, that give you mobility, or that allow you to have zone control within the battlefield.
Then they showed off some character art, starting with some snaky boys. These are part of an enemy faction. There's going to be all different types of snakes to fill out their roster, cobras, rattlesnakes, what have you. Next up is the Living Statue Knight. The details are awesome, the way they fall to pieces. These guys used to be protectors and have since been turned into our adversaries. We got to see some zombie shamblers, which I like, but I am concerned about the red glowy bits. He definitely might want to get that looked at by a doctor. They showed off 3 different variations of some ghosty boys, and the most important part of the stream, the saber-tooth cub. Look at that thing. It's adorable. So shout out to the artist over at Intrepid, Priscilla. Keep up the good work. My wife loves all of these cute little pets. They showed off more Empyrean models. This time we get the full body and not just the face. The female model is definitely looking better than the male model. Next up, they had the Kalar concepts, which both look pretty good. They're definitely your more traditional human model, but you know what? I like it. I enjoy being a normal dude having to face off against all kinds of monsters and evil shenanigans. Last but not least, they showed off more concept art of the Nikwa, which is looking pretty good. And then finally, they had the proper question and answer section, which I have pulled out the best questions from.
And then our next question is from Leoloni from the forums as well, and wanting to know about Summoner and archetypes. So Summoner has been said to fill in the gaps in a party's role composition. What exactly does that mean in practice? Are they capable of speccing to be pure DPS, pure heals, or pure tank? Or instead, are they supposed to be doing all 3 at a lesser level as needed?
It depends on the summon that they bring out. They will have a variety of summon options, and they will have supporting abilities that enhance the role of that particular summon, or that can hybridize the role of that summon based on the ability they cast on the summon, or support by casting on the target either. So it is something that is flexible based on the summoner. And then when you choose a secondary archetype as your total class, that as a primary summoner, that will influence which category your summons perform best as a role. So if you go with a secondary archetype for your class selection that's more DPS oriented, this summons from a role category perspective will be DPS summons. You'll still have the flexibility, but it won't be as strong as if you had chosen a support or a tank role and the summon benefits you would have as a result of those secondary choices.
What is the reason for requiring the destruction of a caravan by the attackers, as opposed to the attackers gaining possession of the caravan?
So it needs to be, well, to answer that question, it needs to be a bit of an even playing field. I've experienced games where you can take control of that particular vehicle, and while you can with ships, with caravans, we really want to emphasize this idea of not necessarily stealing the vehicle, but being forced to achieve victory through destruction. And when you do, you then have the logistical issue of how you're going to transport those goods on your own, rather than servicing the transport of that by just hijacking the opponents. There's also some gamification that can occur if you can just steal those things and take that caravan to a certain location. We need these to become stolen goods, so to speak, for a certain system. And as a result of that, you need to be able to loot the container and not necessarily turn it in. We also don't have a means by which players would turn in another player's caravan at a caravansary as a pit stop or as a final destination, because that would be a stolen caravan also. So we want to provide some level playing field for the caravan users who are transiting around the world, a requirement on the attacker's end to actually succeed at destroying it rather than ninja caravan per se. And that's, again, not to say that that's not possible with ships. Ships are a different vehicle type and have different rule sets as a result.
And then we have OZ Jack, who wants to know about character progression. Is there going to be any form of dual specialization, allowing us to switch between 2 setups of skills, talents, augments, etc.?
2 setups of skills and
Yeah, let's say I'm a
well,
ranger and I want to be more spec towards one thing, and then
oh,
later I decide I want to be spec a different way.
save
Go
the
ahead.
comp. Yeah. That is a convenience component, right? We're giving you the ability to respec, so why not also give you the ability to save specs, so that when you do respec, you're not having to go through the monotony of finding the skills that you're trying to spec into. Yeah, that's going to be a convenience option that will be available to players.
Now, will this be something that is easily done? Because I know in the past we've said, like, we don't want you to be able to just change on the fly immediately.
No, you'll need to be in town for the respec, right? And we're talking about secondary. Excuse me. We're talking about secondary, but also your primary abilities that you respec into, those will need to be in town as well. So either way, you won't be able to do it on the fly. You're not going to be out in the open and at a raid and, I need to be this spec now and be able to change. It's going to have to be something that you strategically have chosen due to what you know is ahead of you out in adventuring, and you're respecing for that reason. But when you do, you'll have safe specs that you can spec into when you're at that NPC.
All right. And then Drunk Ninja wants to know about coastal nodes. Will nodes located on islands be easily accessible at the start of the game, or will it be races like players running for players to gain access to ships to explore potential island node locations?
Well, you are able to swim, so you don't necessarily need it.
No running underwater. You'll swim.
Oh, no, you can actually swim. To answer that question, it's the same with all nodes, right? There are nodes that are going to be located at great distances from the starting locations. Some of those distances will be separated by water. And if it is a goal of some individuals to help seed that node's progression earlier than what might be located closer to the starting areas, then they'll have to incorporate strategies to direct player movement and heat into those areas so that they get a faster start than the nodes that might be located closer to the starting area.
And that is all I have for you guys today. Now, this wasn't the comprehensive Ranger reveal that we were hoping for, but it's better than nothing, I suppose. October will be an Ask Me Anything with the creative director, Steven Sharif. So they'll be pulling their questions from their forums and from their Reddit page. So if you want to participate in that, if you have some questions you want to ask, make sure you go over there and check it out. And if you enjoyed the video, again, leave a like, leave a comment. It really does help the channel. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you guys next time.